Hi, welcome back. I'm Gary Smith. Inspecting crawl spaces. They're up there with attic spaces in terms of places homeowners don't or won't enter. But they're super important, and when drainage is poor, water can hide out there, create mold. And if the home's floor system is leaking, that bad air can leak into the house. Listen to my conversations with professional home inspectors Charles Buell from Washington State, Dusty Jameson and Michael Conrad from Tennessee, and energy expert Brent Loya from Florida. We're talking about inspecting crawl spaces. We have a bunch of folks in here tonight, and tonight I'm saying because we typically are broadcasting on Sunday afternoon, but we are trying this Monday night thing, or during the week thing. Hope you maybe some more of you guys can participate in it. We've got Dusty, Charles, Brent, and Conrad in tonight, and we got a full house. We're going to talk about crawl space foundations, and I know Charles and I knocked it about Sunday. So, without continuing to dribble along here, most crawl spaces are dirty, they're smelly, they're rough. So I know all you guys, we'll talk about the equipment for just a minute to kind of get started here. You'll all use knee pads, right? A headlight, a mask.
Yep.
What else? I mean, a lot of our listeners are first-time home inspectors, and some of them are homeowners. This is broadcast and podcast, so tell our listeners. You guys use a crawler? I mean, that thing where you lay down on it and pull yourself along?
I tried it across my living room and gave up on it and sold it.
I remember when they were doing races at one of the ASHI events. They were, you would get down on the crawler and they were doing races like through an obstacle course.
Yeah, it's just.
I forget where that was. I
feel like it's just one more thing I got to keep track of in there.
Yeah, right. We keep it pretty simple. We go with full Tyvek paper suits with the booties and the hoods, and gloves and knee pads, hopefully some sort of medium grade knee pad. And then we'll typically try to do an N95 mask at minimum, but we do all have full face respirators that will go in for the real nasty ones, just to make sure we're all protected.
Do you all wear headlamps?
We don't do headlamps. We just do flashlights, maybe with a backup flashlight. Jam in the old pocket, but there's always the phone, I guess, as a backup.
Hey, so I've got my crawl space box in the back of my truck. I can actually pull over and show you all the stuff if you need to.
Oh,
so you got a box of goodies that you suit up and do your thing when you get in the crawl space. Is that right?
I have a separate bag I fill up with just the tools I need in there.
Kind of separates out all the dirt.
Exactly. Plus bugs too. You get spiders and stuff, and you keep those in the same boxes, and all of a sudden you got bugs everywhere.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, I've never used one, but there's so many people, it seems like, that are using the crawl bot now. Do any of you guys use the crawl bot? It seems like it's a great idea, but it seems like it's such a limited point of view at sometimes.
Right. A drone in reverse. Yeah.
Exactly.
I've looked at them, but I feel like in our area, the crawl spaces aren't smooth enough. The ground's not smooth enough. It wouldn't make it far in most of them. It would be nice if the ground was completely flat, but those are few and far between. You've got separate parts of the foundation. You got rocks. You got everything you'd have to crawl over. I don't think it would make it.
For me, the number of crawl spaces that I can't get through are so few and far between, and I have to, as a structural pest inspector, I have to call for proper clearances to be made anyway. So I wouldn't use one.
Yeah, I've got you mentioned equipment, so I've got a headlamp, and then I carry an extra flashlight. I've got a pair of cloth coveralls that I have. Knee pads. I've got 2 sets of gloves. I've got one short pair of gloves, and then I got long crawl space gloves that are padded all the way down to the elbow. I've got an extra pair of shoes too, because a lot of the crawl spaces I get are going to be wet, and I don't want to get my boots all muddy. So I actually have an extra pair of tennis shoes that I've got.
Do you have an extra set of keys for your car when you drop them under the?
That's, that's the first thing we tell every student. Never bring your car keys in the crawl
My
space.
wallet stays in my truck, and my keys stay in the bed. I got a little compartment to put them in the bed so they don't go anywhere.
And you charge extra for crawl spaces. That's one of those ancillary inspections, or no, it's just part of your thing. And I think that's probably regional in that if we, my area, we've kind of got a real mix. Brent, you're down there in Florida where you've got a lot of slabs. Most of the stuff's down there slabs, right?
Yeah, it's the beauty of it all. Don't have to get in those crawl spaces much, but you know, back in a certain time, it was believed to be the better building science to have a crawl space. And now, as far as and granted, I hear a lot of opposition, and everyone has their own opinion, but as far as the textbook science, building science textbooks go, yeah, crawl spaces, especially open air or vented crawl spaces, are not the way to go. That was a big mistake. But you still got to deal with that. Yeah, and especially as a home inspector, you got to deal with that a lot. In Florida, a smaller percentage of the time, but you got to definitely get in those old crawl spaces now and again.
Yeah, we'll touch it. We'll touch on that encapsulation versus vented here in just a few minutes here. Let's talk about your technique under the house. I know Charles has mentioned a couple of tips where you do your walk around on the outside going one way and then turn around and go back, you know, to get a different perspective on it. Do you guys have a specific way that you transverse under the house? Charles the other day mentioned something about going to the corners.
Yeah, well, by my pest license sort of guides a little bit of that. We're required to go to all the corners and move the insulation around toilets, fittings, and where doorways are, things like that. These are your high risk areas. So that's what leads me through it. And by the time you do that, the perimeter, you can generally see the central areas, but
so before you get in the crawl, before you even open the thing up, you're doing a once around the house during your visual to look for high water marks, any kind of bad drainage. You're looking for signs that maybe when you do get under there, you want to go to that specific area and look like hose bibs that might have been leaking or not.
Doors, decks, downspouts, gutters. I mean, those are all the hot spots.
right.
You always got to run the plumbing before you go in. If you want the water to go through the pipes. Toilet, you got to look around the toilet. Shower stalls, and I was just thinking about a shower stall I just saw recently, and without pulling the insulation down, I never would have saw it, but there was one little watermark, and I just had a bad feeling about it. Pulled the insulation down, and you see a floor that's rotted out, and the insulation caught it all.
So that's a great point, Justin. There's a lot of inspectors out there that would disclaim the floor insulation as hiding some of the structural elements, the sheathing, whatnot. And I think a lot of the SOPs really protect that point of view. But in our opinion, for our company, we encourage them, like you guys are saying, to pull the insulation down, disturb it around these high problem areas to make sure that you are at least potentially uncovering those big issues for the client. So yeah, we definitely will move insulation back.
Well, especially if you've seen, run your moisture meter around a toilet and you see water under the water's indicated by moisture meter under the flooring. You better be checking the subfloor in the crawl space when you can. And
so a lot of the bathrooms in our area are tile, which don't do well with the moisture meter. So we don't have the luxury to do that sort of precursory scan. I think it's a great idea, but it's just not part of our process. So we are very much looking for water and stain indicators in the subfloor. We're seeing a lot of Avantech, which is really good for maintaining its structural integrity despite water damage, but it's really good about showing those brown moisture stains. They don't typically go away very easily. So it's good for a visual indicator.
Even a tile floor, if you've got, and tile is problematic if it's over wonderboard because of the thickness, but if you use a Tramex you can easily find moisture even under the tile.
I tell you one I just found recently. What I found with the thermal camera. I just went back through scanning with the thermal camera, and it showed blue, and it was kind of actually under the tile, and started looking further into it. And I could see a little bit of discoloration, but the thermal is what set it off.
The grout lines will often show.
Yeah.
All good tips.
We are doing the crawl space inspection as a rule of thumb at the very end of our inspection. So the exterior is done oftentimes first, and so a lot of mental little yellow flags or check notes are put into the brain as far as, okay, this is a low drainage area. I got to go back and check this. Here's a step crack. I want to see what's corresponding cracking on the inside, or maybe it's a brick veneer crack. I got to see some sort of corresponding block foundation. And so then, like Dusty was saying, we got to make sure we run all the plumbing to ensure that we have leak opportunities in which to find in the crawl space area. So yeah, it's oftentimes the last thing. So you come out nice and dirty and dusty for the client overview. That's always fun.
I like to tell my clients I'm going to run as much water as I possibly can and then do the crawl space last, and maybe I won't even have to go in there.
That's a perk.
Oh, from all of the leaks you see?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got wastewater going down. Oh, got wastewater down there. It's unsafe. Can't go.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see what you mean. So you're in the crawl and you do see water. What do? And this is not just regular water. Talk about that, guys. You got water dripping from the insulation under there. You got water dripping from the joists. You got mold. You got all this stuff going on. It's we'll talk about that for a minute, Brent. That's that sick house kind of thing, the precursor to it, so to speak.
Bring your inhaler.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's the house breathes, right? So, and that's what before I was saying, the whole thing about especially in a vented crawl space. I think Gary, you can probably relate to this where you're at in a humid climate. There is a lot of issues that can happen, and from my experience looking at it, less of from maybe a home inspector's perspective and more of a let's encapsulate and insulate the envelope of this home. A lot of people jump to that conclusion. Okay, I got an open airspace under my crawl space. There's no insulation under there. Basically, I got a big giant hole underneath my house. I got this open envelope that affects this building science, and that is true. But you come to a place like Florida or Mississippi, or I mean, really anywhere up the East Coast or Midwest that has humid weather in the summer. You put insulation in that crawl space, you don't put down a vapor barrier properly. You have, like Dusty was saying, a downspout or a deck or something, and you get rainstorms all summer long. You get that moisture built up in there. That insulation is going to hold in that moisture just like it would the conditioned air inside your house. So just as the other guys were saying all along, just the different things and aspects that you'll see. I know here in Florida, one of the things you'll find is depending on the type of floors you have in the house, there's a lot of tile and this and that. Sometimes you will never even know, and it could really affect the indoor air quality and health of the home. But like if you have an old house with wood floors, you could luckily see it. In Florida, it turns up in like orange circles or squares on the interior of the home, and it's literally like a mushroom, like psilocybin, like mold spreading throughout the wood, and you literally have to cut it out. No dehumidifier will ever suck that dry or anything. You have to cut that out of the house. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and it's tough. Every region is a little bit different, but really it's, I mean, if you're going to if you're looking at a house, I mean, first things that I see, you had a vented crawl space and no vapor barrier, that's just asking for a problem right there.
So I was
going to say, Michael, chime in there and talk to us about that poll you ran in the group. You had asked about, whether you most commonly see dirt on the ground, or when you go under, do you see just loose 6 mil poly under there, or do you do encapsulated? Do you see those a lot? And we didn't get talk about that poll.
Yeah, so based on a little bit of a contentious conversation that Charles and I had the other night, I got this impression from Charles that there was a lot of slab crawl spaces. That would be a concrete slab at the base of your crawl space. That there was these animals running around that I didn't know about, and I thought for sure that, man, I just knew about crawl spaces. So I ran this poll in a bunch of different groups to see, and I was both surprised and I guess not surprised in some ways that the vast majority of people, like 80+%, either were seeing a dirt crawl space floor or a poorly installed 6 mil poly, which for me, I tell people a 6 mil poly poorly installed is like the bottom of a boat that's 90% good. You're like, 90%? That's like an A, man. That's pretty good. Yeah, your boat's still sinking. So that vapor is coming out of the ground. That moisture is wicking out of the ground because at least here in the South, there's enough rain oftentimes to saturate the groundwater table where that water is always coming out. And so, yeah, you're seeing a lot of dirt floors according to these polls across the U.S. I would love if it was different, but the vast majority of people are seeing that there's a water vapor either coming from the out of doors, if you're in a humid crawl space, sort of humid climate, or at the very least wicking out of the ground, even if you're not. So there is a lot of undue amount of bulk water vapor coming into the crawl, which is, like Brent said earlier, 100-year-old bad idea that we're still doing.
So I think in the places that I've been here in Mississippi, I know of my partner as a contractor put concrete under his after he built the house. He had a guy crawl under there with a ground hose and just, pour concrete under it, 2 or 3 inches thick, and that cured his water problem. He had moisture under it, but I think his was more of ground moisture coming up. I don't think he didn't have a drainage issue, but he sealed it, and it didn't seem to come through it again. Of course, they put a layer of plastic down before they poured and that kind of thing. I have not seen that in the design part of it, Charles. That'd be a good idea if you're building something. Do you see that often?
Absolutely. I think that slabs should be required in crawl spaces. I had a house I built in 1983, and it had such a moisture issue, even with double 6 mil poly, caulked and taped and all the lapping joints. We still could not get the humidity low enough. And so we went back in there, and if any of you guys have ever operated a 3-inch hose on a cement truck, it's a pain in the butt. But we poured a 4-inch slab on top of that double poly, and immediately the moisture went down, even as it was curing. Today, 30 years later, I visited that crawl space, and the wood moisture content is 6 and 8%. And so
so you tested the floor joists and beams and things of that nature underneath the house, and you got a real dry reading.
Yeah.
I mean, that's great to hear, because unfortunately, the virgin wood that's coming out of the mills, ever more green, it feels like it's coming out of the mills, and the high humidity in a mixed humid climate like here in the Mid-South means that you're having moisture content of your wooden members in the crawl space can be 13, 14, 15, 16, approaching 17, 18% easily, which is majorly problematic, and it's very seasonal. You're not going to see as many issues, of course, in the winter, but it's in the summer, it's just going to be god awful. And as home inspectors, you get into this really tough call where you have this seasonality of calling problems, where it's raining in the crawl space because of ambient humidity issues in the summer, and then you're not seeing it. Maybe you'll see the evidence of it if you're a smart guy, but you're not calling it regularly. And so half the year, you're the jerk that keeps bringing up all these moisture issues. And a lot of the agents or clients that you're working with, are asking you, is this normal? And you sort of get into this unfortunate situation where you're like, well, yeah, it is normal, but I can't tell you it's so normal that you shouldn't do anything about it. But I also can't tell you it's so abnormal that you should spend $10,000 on encapsulation. So you're stuck between this rock and a hard place of what do you do about all this very real, very legitimate relative humidity problems that are existing in crawl spaces.
That's why I think you got to bring that crawl space indoors, and where you've got those concerns. I mean,
Oh gosh.
you gotta, Michael, answer me this question: Is your indoor space on a slab not just a really tall crawl space?
So I'm only supposing that this has got to be a regional vernacular, because we would never describe our indoors, even on the most beautiful monolithic slab here, as a tall crawl space. We have such a poor estimation and poor view of crawl spaces. to insinuate that a living space could ever be a crawl space is just
that you live in your crawl. Yeah, right.
No reason it can't be if you condition it the same way you do of that really tall crawl space.
You're not wrong, Charles. You really aren't. And of course, Steve talks about this with a perfect wall that could be converted into the perfect slab with the appropriate insulation and vapor management. And so this is a beautiful concept. Actually, there's a contractor in our area that builds monolithic slabs with 2-inch XPS insulation with good vapor barriers underneath it. So, I mean, it's a beautiful slab foundation, and it's some of the best construction around. But for whatever reason, in this Mid-South area, people are stupid, poor, cheap, or all of the above, because block foundations still rule the day, despite how much they crack. And nobody's building slabs, despite how great they are. So there's just a lot of bass-ackwards mentality in building still.
Home energy score. Tell me, Brent, on the home energy score, do you have a section in there that talks about encapsulated crawls? Is there a line item in the home energy score?
Yes and no. Obviously, we look at the foundation, regardless of what type, basement, crawl, slab. In the home energy score specifically, we're going to keep it simple, right? We're going to try to give that home the not basic information, but we're going to, like we're talking about here. I mean, it sounds like there's a huge percentage of homes across the country that could really use some major renovations that are, potentially extremely costly. Granted, yes, for the science of the home, for the longevity of it, for the safety, for the health, all really good things. For the home energy score, it's going to take into consideration your area, your local weather, and climate. And again, a big part of it is going to be, what is in that crawl space. Is it just, like here in Florida, if there's a crawl space, they're typically older homes from the 50s or 60s. They're vented crawl spaces. Most of them don't have any insulation underneath them. There's no duct work or anything like that. But let's say you get into a place that does have a crawl. It's a unvented crawl space, and there's duct work in there. We're not going to talk about vapor barriers. But we're going to talk about, whether or not you're going to insulate or not.
So the home energy score really doesn't address foundations, crawls. What are the line items if I am a home energy score keeper?
Sure.
An inspector?
Assessor. We call you a certified assessor.
Okay.
You're going to look at the different classifications that we simplify it to is a slab, unvented crawl, vented crawl, basement, or conditioned basement. So, there is a certain generalization there. And again, it really comes into...
So would the encapsulation be in a vented basement or an unvented basement? Would that, to kind of lean on Charles's thing, there's not a section in there that doesn't address encapsulation.
Yeah, well, we would look at it as what we call an unvented crawl, and then we'd look at the R values of the wall insulation and or the subfloor insulation. And that's kind of, again, it all depends. If you have a duct system in your crawl space in a unvented crawl, it's not so important to insulate the subfloor as it would be to insulate the rim joists and the walls.
Correct.
Crawl space. So
correct. You would note that, and the modeling software then begins to take that into account in your overall score at the end. What if you have a heating system under there?
Correct.
It's encapsulated, and I know I saw a Michael standing in one talking about on a video you've done, and he's talking about the the vertical system. It's a big crawl. I'm thinking it's a crawl, maybe a basement. Mike, you have to help me out here.
It was a basement with a crawl component that was as tall as a basement. So they had insulated with a spray foam, 2-part spray foam on the walls, and had gone up into the little mini stud walls that sit on top of the foundation, and then of course up into the rim joist. But I will say, I'm a huge fan, don't hear me wrong, I'm a huge fan of insulating the walls, taking a thermal barrier to the foundation walls. But there's some people in my area, and I'd love to hear Dusty's 2 cents on this, that are skipping the foundation wall insulation and focusing on air sealing management rather than in thermal management through insulation, and are still achieving the same results. The big problems with crawl space in our area isn't the insulation or lack thereof. It's the fact that there's an infiltration of air, and with it, humidity and air and water vapor. And so for me, I'm all about, again, put some 2-inch extruded polystyrene on the walls, or put some spray from the walls. But there's a company here that is saving their clients money by not doing that, and they're just focusing on air sealing and really friggin' awesome, unbreakable, sealed continuous vapor barriers, which is a catchphrase that we use: sealed continuous vapor barrier, and the idea that is a true class 1 vapor retarder. But that's where I would focus my energies, because dehumidification versus conditioning combined with air sealing and a good sealed continuous vapor barrier is, I think, the 3 pillars you stand on. The 4th being the insulation on the foundation wall. Certainly important. I love it. I want it. But if it's going to come down to a cost component, that one will go.
Yeah.
Mr. Charles, got anything to say?
Well, my overall theory and approach to houses in general is you want to insulate that envelope, which includes the foundation, down below your below the point at which the ground becomes a contributing factor for both cooling and heating. So by the houses I built in the Syracuse area, we insulated down 8 feet. Frost line was 4 feet. So the house had access to constant 56 degrees, 55 degrees around that. So you're never heating for more than 55 to 68, or cooling from the same way. So the contribution in that manner is huge, but it has to be insulated heavily down. I mean, we talk about 2 or 3 inches of foam. What's that are? Maybe 15 or so, maybe 20, but I'm talking about insulating to R40 on all exterior walls, R60 in the attic, and getting these things super tight, and you're circulating the air through the crawl space or the basement. I mean, the basement, all crawl spaces is a short basement, in my view. So you want to have all of that interior envelope at the same pressures, the same temperatures.
Right, right.
So if I look historically at crawl spaces in this area, they actually stem, I would say historically, from a construction standpoint, out of, say, the way Florida does it with pylons and these open air crawls.
Exactly.
And so if you go to some of these old historic 100-year-old homes in our area, which is our version of historic, you're going to see brick pylons or perimeter skirting without even a missing perimeter.
Yeah. Go to Key West, all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very popular on the coast and in Florida, but that's uncommon in our area. We now sort of live and die by these weird perimeter foundations and columns. But for me, the venting got lost somewhere in the middle here, where we stopped having it be this completely open air area, and has started enclosing it and then capturing some of that humidity in this false way. And then the Northerners, your folks up in the, the New York area, or maybe in Washington State, they embrace and understand heat management, insulation, much more than the southern mixed humid.
Yeah, a lot of people think that in hot climates you don't need insulation, but you need it just as much.
Exactly. And so it's just this really bad idea that has gotten worse as we've gotten better at building, because we've gotten tighter homes that are having more relative humidity issues and condensation issues now. And so it's sort of a giant mess. And I agree with you, Charles, 100%. If we could make a bunch of short basements and call them crawl spaces, I'm all about it. Or better yet, like my friend, do these really nice insulated monolithic slabs where the footing and the slab is all one. But the intelligence and the cheapness of the builders here to pour that extra foundation material, that extra concrete material, is just not happening. And so I'm looking at literally hundreds and thousands of new homes being built with bad crawl spaces. We're going into these I-joist homes, and they're moldy. They're not even gone to the closing table yet.
Things will shift because it has to. I mean, you can't. That isn't sustainable. That kind of approach, and the builders will have to change.
Yeah, since we're talking about builders, you mentioned in one of the threads, Michael, that you had a contractor that was doing some experimenting. Can you tell us the story on what's going on with the contractor that has tried a couple of different things?
Yeah, that was actually Will Jones.
Not Will.
Right. I know a little bit about it. So he's an energy rater and home inspector in our area, and so he's got some data loggers that he is using to sort of measure ambient temperature versus relative humidity and the cyclical nature of it, given the days and the weeks that go by. And so he's finding some really irregular results, which I'm remaining skeptical on until I see it myself. But he's showing that even in an unvented crawl with active dehumidification, industrial strength.
Well, I do know that Will's a thinker. He'll sort it out.
Yeah.
So let's rehash that. An unvented crawl with a dehumidifier under it.
So he's trying to dehumidify the world. I know.
He's dehumidifying the outside space. So
you did that out on your front porch, didn't you, Gary?
I considered putting a small Walmart-size air conditioner in front of me, right between my legs, just having it blow on me. You know, it's so hot down here. It's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, you guys in the South can fix your issue overnight. If
the intelligence of the builders has begun to shift. The new energy 2012 IRC has pushed them towards thinking about duct leakage standards. There is new insulation standards coming with 15. So this is happening, but just like with EFIS or EIFS or whatever you want to call it back in the old days, the science is ahead of the installation practice. And so the installers, the builders are, I call it meta knowledge. They know that A goes to B and B goes to C, but they don't know why A goes to B.
They'll catch up in continuing ed.
They will, but there's a lot of poor new homeowners getting these really bad homes. I was in a home with Will Jones just the other day, and it's raining off every surface. I'm in there. I set my FLIR E8 to have a condensation alarm at the dew point, and literally almost every surface around me is at the dew point because the humidity was so high, and it's leaking cold air into crawl space, reducing the temperature and increasing relative humidity. It was crazy.
But this gets to the crux of how you guys can fix this overnight. Take all your air conditioners and throw them in the Gulf of Mexico.
You Northerners will never understand the need for air conditioning.
I totally understand. That's why you guys can get away with living in uninhabitable places.
There it is. Yeah, there it is.
But, the reality is you didn't have this issue before air conditioning because your floors weren't cold.
True. It's true. The old houses, they breathed, and they just dealt with the fact that they opened the windows to get cool.
Make your floors 55 degrees. What's going to happen when it hits with 90% humidity, 90-degree air? It's going to rain.
And I'm not suggesting that we start a revolution as home inspectors encouraging builders to build crawl spaces that are encapsulated. In fact, I would much rather they either not build crawl spaces at all or do something different, but they are building crawl spaces, and I can't stop them tomorrow.
That's right.
And so I'm trying to figure out how to make good recommendations, understand the science, and help more people make that shift in the builders. It begins with homeowners, energy raters, and home inspectors and real estate agents understanding this stuff and beginning to make that pressure to move those builders. Say, we don't want to buy that house. It doesn't have a blank in it. We don't want to inspect that house. We're going to bust your chops if we do. these kinds of things.
Well, that encapsulated crawl space really comes across to me as not just the best building science way, but I mean, ultimately, it's going to be the most effective way. I mean, you guys have probably been in more crawl spaces than me. I mean, how many crawl spaces have you been in with insulation on the subfloor that is actually installed well? Very little. There's always bats hanging off, and what a lot of people don't realize is that even if that bat is hanging off a centimeter off of that subfloor, it's losing R value. It's opening a pocket for moisture, and it's creating problems. So again, when you have that vented crawl space, and then let's say you even have your floor insulated, or you have that airflow down there, and like you were saying, you're cooling that inside of the house. That hot, moist air is on the bottom of the house. Where's that going to get caught up in? So you do the encapsulated crawl. It's ultimately going to be more affordable and more effective over the longevity of the home.
Well, let's say you have 10 inches of fiberglass between the joists, and it's 90% humid in the crawl space. What is the humidity 1 inch into that fiberglass, 2 inches into that fiberglass, 3 inches, etc.? Well, it's the same. Mm-hmm. Fiberglass does nothing to prevent the air that's in the fiberglass from being the same humidity as outside.
Well, your problem is too, your fiberglass, your insulation's up above the floor framing. You've got the bottom 2 or 3 inches that is sticking down, and that's where you get all the humidity and the mold, or the humidity hits the wood, and then the mold starts growing. It's all below the fiberglass. Yeah. You can actually reach up and pull that fiberglass down and see nice yellow wood above the fiberglass because it's all dry and insulated there. I think so when if I run into a crawl space that has a lot of humidity issues and it's got mold growing, I'll pull the insulation down just for effect. I can show what the wood should look like, and then the bottom 2 or 3 inches will show what the humidity has done to it. I mean, even having the insulation doesn't fix the problem. Insulation's not the issue here. It's to do with the other stuff.
That's why in a floor like that, you're better off with some kind of spray foam or something that doesn't allow air to move through it. But again, insulating the foundation is much better. It's less insulation overall. It's then your floors don't suffer either being too hot or too cold. It's going to be
except when you install the insulation with the paper down.
Yeah.
Or if you install cellulose on the walls, or just the fiberglass blankets on the walls. Oh man.
Yeah.
Do you see crawl spaces with spray cellulose?
I just saw one 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, they're it was very popular trend in this Mid-South area in the 90s. You can always tell when the house was built in the 90s.
Yep.
About 10 years, they really like spraying the cellulose with the wheat germ or whatever the binder was.
I think you can get away with that if you have a perfect ground cover vapor barrier.
Perfect ground cover? What is that? I've never seen one.
A slab over poly.
So, I'm on a crusade. You saw this a little bit in that transfer grill thread, Charles and Gary, but I'm on a crusade. I tell you, this last crawl space where it was raining, I've been talking about, has made me just lose my cool on conditioning the crawl space. Now, notwithstanding Charles' desire for tiny basements, here in the vast majority of people, at least in the poll would reflect, they're seeing unvented crawls, dirt floors. The code in 408-2 stipulates that you can condition, and I am just losing my marbles over this, because conditioning, the secondary benefit of conditioning is dehumidification, and the primary benefit of a dehumidifier is dehumidification. And I don't know why we're spending all this time cheapening out and just dropping a grill in the crawl space and pumping a bunch of cold air in the summer.
No. But why have two separate systems when you've got a system that's already functioning to dehumidify your house? Why have a separate mechanical thing? You got to maintain that goes down there where nobody goes.
So what Charles is saying is put a return in every room, and
entire plenum,
and use the crawl space as the return plenum.
Yeah. So again, this goes back to our horrible disagreement on, what considered a crawl space here.
Yeah. What is the definition of a crawl? When does it become a basement?
Well, crawl.
We don't have those here, so Brent and I are like, yeah. What?
I got a stand-up. I have a stand-up crawl space under my house. It's called a basement.
Well, I tell you where it gets really tricky is when you get into the older houses that have a cellar, and it's part of it's an accessible basement, and then part of it's a true crawl space.
Well, some of those old cellars were worse than crawl spaces. I mean, they weren't any more sealed than a crawl space is. So
and they're not sealed, Charles. That's the key. What Dusty's describing is what we sometimes call those a dugout basement, because it's largely just a crawl space with a big sort of 6 to 8 foot standing room in the middle, but then you have this perimeter 4 feet of crawl space around it. It's actually great for inspecting, because you're down there and you're just like sort of looking around while standing up. So it's nice to inspect, but they're terrible. And what I have recommended in the past when I've done some consulting work was lay a slab, build a block wall up near the cutout, and then lay additional slab out to the foundation. So you sort of concretify everything to prevent moisture coming up out of the ground.
I think you shouldn't sell slabs, we call them rat slabs. You shouldn't sell them short. They're cheap to do. You put down your poly. I'd like to see that 60 mil PVC welded seam go on the floor, up the walls, just below the wood sill plate, seal it to the foundations, put a slab on top of it, and be done. And then heat it, condition it. That to me is the way to go. Turn it into the place you can send the kids when they're bad, and you can eat off the floor.
I will always struggle to condition or put a grill into an area where there is dirt, dust.
Yeah, but there won't be any dirt
or bugs. I don't know.
There's no dirt or bugs in the kind of space I'm talking about. It's literally a short living space.
My thing is, why would you? And this is based on what I've seen. Why would you even need to condition the space if you're dehumidifying it and there's not much?
Yeah, you just want to change the air. I mean, here we have to install the soil gas mitigation systems with any kind of a conditioned or sealed crawl space, and I think that makes sense. You've got the same stagnant air sitting around down there forever. It's good to change that air, and if you're changing it regularly, the amount of pollutants or whatever that's going to be in that air is almost minimal. It's no worse than your regular house air at that point. So
I posed this question to Charles a little earlier, and I don't know that I'm satisfied with the answer, but Charles and I are never satisfied with each other, so that's no big deal. What about the VOCs in the plastic that's put under a slab, and you cut a hole and you allow that gas to come into the crawl space? Come into the living space.
It can't be allowed to.
So, does anyone have any ideas about the conversation of the product that's being put under there and the off-gassing that product might do? The code doesn't address that in any way, I don't think.
I don't know that there's any significant off-gassing of PVC roofing material. It's no different than your vinyl windows or. Is there any off-gassing from that stuff? I think it all happens.
I don't know.
I think a lot of those poly products, polypropylene, polyvinyl chloride, a lot of those have done their off-gassing cycle very shortly after fabrication.
Mm-hmm.
Are you mixtures
when you put that stuff together, you're gluing it when you lap it. You're lapping it a foot or so, or you're gluing it. I saw some data about pinning it to the ground with pins, but
that's just more holes and shit.
Right.
No holes.
So the problem I think we're coming up against, and I'm curious to know if there's any other listeners out there that are seeing this, and that is that we have the ideal. We know what it is. Charles has described it for us. Tiny short basements, return to the house, condition and all that beautiful stuff, where he's in the kids. But I don't live in Charles' perfect little world. I live in a dirty,
I don't
disgusting,
even live on my planet.
and so since I live in a dirty old South, I got a bunch of problems I got to deal with. And because I have imperfect encapsulations and a ton of vented crawl spaces, we've got some major humidity infiltration issues. And so my crusade against conditioning, which I'm now calling it that, by the way, crusade against conditioning, is about the fact that I have almost never seen a good enough install to manage the true relative humidity infiltration. And so because of that, air conditioning is a poor substitute for dehumidification. Here it is, Charles. Air conditioning reduces air temperature, which increases relative humidity for the same volume of air. So dehumidification.
But it's not the actual much, there's not very much water in it. It's cold.
Well, so that's our problem, is that we have a sufficiently high amount of relative humidity to start with, and then as you drive the air temperature down, that same volume of air increases relative humidity. That's Dr. Bales right there in psychometrics. Go check out your psychometric chart, right? But ultimately, conditioning drives a little bit of water out by dehumidifying through the evaporator coil, but it still is increasing relative humidity in certain given cycles. That's what we're seeing. Whereas dehumidification and mixing fans is solely meeting the need where it is. We're managing humidity where we can do it. And it's because people can't install perfectly. So yes, is it a Band-Aid? Yeah, but it's a Band-Aid that's super relevant to our problems that we're experiencing.
So when you are an inspector and you're crawling under there and you see something that he's attempted to pull it off, he's got the floor covered really well and it seems to turn up the edges. You're going to pull out your moisture meter and take the moisture reading. How are you going, in Michael's scenario, where would the inspector, the typical inspector, what would be the next step in recommending a dehumidifier if you didn't see one?
Well, any wood moisture content above 14% is too high.
So you're probing or you're checking how damp the wood is. Michael, what would in your scenario, what are you telling your guys if you don't see a dehumidifier and you see the sort of encapsulated crawl space? Are you telling them the method in order to, what's your protocol for recommending a dehumidifier under there?
Yeah, so I'm going to share, but I want Dusty to share first.
Yeah, I was just going to say you gotta look at the conditions. You got to look at what's there. Is there staining? Is there evidence of fungus? Is there anything like that going on? I have my moisture meter with me when I go into a crawl space just because it's in my pocket, but I don't use it in crawl space that much because that moisture meter, what it reads today is going to be completely different what it reads 4 months from now. And I just don't see it. If I check something and it shows dry, then that's not conclusive for me because it could have a terrible summer.
Well, I want to speak to that because, here, if I've got 15, 16% in the summer, I'm not as alarmed by that because I know it's going to go down in the winter. But if I've got 15, 16% in winter, I'm much more concerned because I know it's going up. So you've got to know your area. It may reverse. It may be the opposite for you. But you got to figure out what you should be expecting in your area to know how you can be predictive.
So that is ultimately my answer as well. I would say that Dusty's getting at, you got to have some sort of context. You've got to keep common sense present because there is no formula. We're not taking the same moisture readings that Dusty's not taking, and you've got to recognize that there's a seasonality to it. That's important. We have taken a hard stance. It's difficult to land on, and any listeners here are going to struggle because it means you got to make your own formula for your own area. But we've had to draw a new line in the sand, a new relative normal, because if I were to say moisture content above X is callable, or fungal mold presence at this amount is callable, it gets complicated really fast because there's so many relative factors. So we give the builders and the renovators a lot of leeway, more than we probably should. And we say, if you've got a pretty good vapor barrier and it's well lapped or it attempted it's sealed and you've managed the water pretty well, and we're not seeing a lot of active fungal growth, we're not going to go ahead and make that big recommendation for a dehue. That's going to cause more problems than it's worth. But if it's raining off the ductwork and we've got some serious fungal growth and it's a brand new home, heck yeah, I'm going for the jugular on that one. But it's every different house. You got to make your own judgment, which means you, the listener, have got to draw your own line in the sand of what your relative normal is.
Right. I agree.
Good stuff. Yeah. We're going to cut it. We've been 20 minutes over what we normally do, and normally folks are listening to us going to the next job, and they've been at the job, and we've been so entertaining, they're now late for their inspection. Michael, always good to see you. Brent, thank you for coming in. Dusty, Charles, for Gary Smith, we're going to sign out. Talk soon.
Adios, guys.
Take care.
Drop the mic.